Temple Newsam is a grand and rather smart-looking Tudor Jacobean building, extensively renovated to its current appearance in the 17th century by Sir Arthur Ingram. The house stayed in his family for almost 300 years until it was sold to the Council Corporation in 1922 for a bargain price. There are some who claim that the owner was anxious to get rid of it for some reason. However, before this time, the place had experienced a turbulent history and changed hands many times as a result of conflict, treason, and death. Indeed, some might argue that the very land itself has been tortured by so much grief and loss of life. Hardly surprising then that it is said to be one of the most haunted buildings in Yorkshire, with reports of unexplained screams and the sound of bodies being dragged down the stairs. Before the Norman invasion of 1066, the site was owned by two Anglo-Saxon thanes, Dunstan and Glunier. However, the property was confiscated from them and put in the hands of one Ilbert de Lacy as a reward for his enthusiastic participation in the harrying of the North. Doesn't that sound poetic? It was in fact a military campaign which involved an immense amount of slaughter, destruction, extermination and ethnic cleansing, mainly in Yorkshire, by the Norman French in 1069. One of Ilbert's descendants granted the property to the Knights Templar in 1155, but despite the fact that they farmed the site very efficiently for over 100 years, it was taken from them during the suppression of the Knights Templar by Edward I. There have been modern-day sightings of a grey monk in the Temple Newsam grounds, an apparition which could perhaps date from such times. The lands were then passed to others who themselves fell out of favour with the monarch, until eventually it was bequeathed to the Darcy family. They managed to hang on to it for around a century and a half before finally in 1537 Thomas Darcy also fell foul of the king, this time Henry VIII. Not surprisingly, because he had been involved in an uprising known as the Pilgrimage of Grace. This was a protest started in Yorkshire against the dissolution of the monasteries, which was a series of bloodthirsty smash and grab raids which seems to feature so many times in these ghostly tales. Thomas Darcy was beheaded on Tower Hill in London and buried nearby, so it is unlikely that any of the hauntings at Temple Newsam would involve his unfortunate spirit. Another resident of Temple Newsam fell victim to an even more violent death during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Born here in 1546, he was Lord Darnley, not Darcy, Darnley. Do keep up. Darnley's father had been given the property after he was forced to flee Scotland due to his involvement in the rough wooing. That's right, the rough wooing. It's a real thing. I'm not making this up. Yet another poetic term for a violent military campaign. Darnley became famous when he married Mary, Queen of Scots, and fathered her child. It is said that Lady Jane Dudley, a fellow resident of Temple Newsam, had fallen in love with him, and upon hearing of the marriage became so distraught that she hanged herself with her own girdle. Perhaps it is she who has been seen wandering the parts of the house built in the 1500s, wearing a lace cap, a white robe, and a small ruff. Unfortunately, Darnley was an arrogant and unpleasant man who made many enemies in the Scottish court, and even stabbed a man to death along with several other assailants. In Scotland, Darnley himself was murdered, or should I say murdered? Aye, murdered, when two explosions ripped through his rooms. Apparently a couple of barrels of gunpowder had been placed directly underneath his bedroom. This was only 8 months after the birth of his son. However, I feel that I can't really go further without mentioning that the man who was convicted of Lord Darnley's murder, perhaps unjustly as it happens, was one Captain Blackadder of the clan Blackadder. Again, Google it if you don't believe me. Uncannily, history almost repeated itself years later when Darnley's son himself, by now King James VI of Scotland and King James I of England, was also very nearly blown up in the Houses of Parliament during the infamous Gunpowder Plot. He survived, of course, and it was during the reign of King James that Temple Newsam was eventually bought up by the Ingram family, who I mentioned at the beginning. Nonetheless, a stability of ownership over the next few centuries would not bring peace to the house. In 1652, Mary Ingram, who was 14 years old at the time, travelled to attend a party in nearby Barrowby, not to be confused with several other Barrowbys up and down the country. This one is situated just at the other side of the M1 from Temple Newsam. Not that I'm suggesting that there was an M motorway at the time, of course, but that would be silly. After having enjoyed her evening immensely, she was returning home when her carriage was ambushed by a group of highwaymen. They stole all of little Mary's valuables, including a pearl necklace which had been a christening present from her own grandfather. She was left so distraught by the attack that the next day she is said to have had no memory of the nasty event. Instead, she was convinced that her jewellery had been lost and began searching every nook and cranny of the house. Despite the protestations of her family and the staff, her obsessive behaviour became worse and worse. She began unpicking cushions and even pulling up floorboards to try to find her lost items, often refusing to eat or drink far too often. Just a few weeks later, she eventually wasted away and died. Even now, she is said to continually wander the house. She's been seen wearing a blue dress and a long scarf, and several people have mentioned seeing a small scar next to her right eye. Sometimes she's standing by a doorway, at others walking around, forever searching in vain. Another unfortunate girl is also sent to haunt the place. Phoebe Gray was a young maid who worked at a house in the 18th century. One evening in 1704, a huge party was thrown at Temple Newsam to celebrate the Duke of Marlborough's great victory at Blenheim, complete with an enormous bonfire in the grounds. Phoebe had just taken a drink to someone upstairs and was returning to the kitchen via the back staircase when she was accosted by William Collinson, an estate worker. According to Collinson's later testimony, he had admired young Phoebe for many a month and decided to use the confusion of the festivities to steal a kiss from her. When she resisted, he squeezed her so hard that she was crushed and suffocated like a little sparrow. Seeing what he had done, he panicked and then dragged her down the stairs and out across the gardens to a well. He callously threw her body down there and ran off into the darkness. A few days later, her body was found, and witnesses said that they had seen Collinson lingering by the back staircase on the night. Upon his arrest, he made his sorry confession, and in due course he was tried and hanged at York for his crime. It is thought that several of the eerie sounds heard by both visitors and ghost hunters in the house are a result of Phoebe's lingering spirit, including the aforementioned screams and sounds of a body being dragged down the stairs and across the floor. In addition to these phenomena, there have been reports of unexplained footsteps, cold blasts of air, and bizarrely rippling motions in the carpet. A health and safety hazard waiting to happen, if you ask me. The council really should look into that. Speaking of which, because of its council ownership, Temple Newsam is nowadays used as an educational resource and is well worth a visit. Well, I hope you enjoyed this latest instalment, and never fear, there will be another one coming along soon.